Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here today on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory, and I'd also like to recognize the Métis people of Alberta who share a very, very deep connection with this land. Last week, the UCP revealed its 2024 provincial budget, which doubled as a comprehensive list of their broken promises. This budget betrays Central Albertans in a variety of ways, but especially when it comes to making their lives more affordable. We've known for a long time that Albertans have been struggling to keep up with the rising cost of living. Rents are soaring, utility prices have become unmanageable, inflation keeps driving up the price of groceries, and the list goes on. Albertans know how life has become completely unaffordable, and Danielle Smith should know this too, as you'd think that's why in 2023, during the election, she promised Albertans a tax cut. She made that her big promise of the last election, promising Albertans to put over $1,500 per family into their pockets. And then Danielle Smith broke that promise at the first chance she got. Now, she said at the time she'd found room in her budget for her promise, but then all of a sudden, now, just a few months later, she can't. And that's on her to explain to Albertans how just a few months later, with her budget facing the same price of natural resources and the same interest rates as when she first made that commitment, that now somehow she's forced to break her key affordability promise. And not only has Smith canceled her promised tax cut, but officials have confirmed it's not even factored into future budgets. In other words, Albertans can't count on the UCP to stick to their promises in the future. But that's not all. Instead of cutting taxes as she promised, this budget shortchanges municipalities by more than $1 billion from what they tell us they need. What does that mean? Well, they tell us higher property taxes for Albertans. Alberta municipalities said after reviewing the budget, quote, the province is passing the tax burden onto property owners through significant property tax increases, end quote. This UCP budget means Albertans will be paying more for crucial municipal services. For instance, here in Red Deer, people are already facing a property tax increase of 6%. And that's just to keep things going as they are now. But the budget hasn't invested in the new infrastructure all of our growing communities desperately need. This budget means Albertans are going to have to pay more property taxes, just as Danielle Smith breaks her promise to them on income taxes. This is a choice, and it's Danielle Smith's choice to break her promises while also looming over chaos in our most important services. Let's be clear. This budget fails on far more fronts than just affordability. For instance, our K-12 education in Alberta is funded at the lowest funding per student in the country. With the bountiful resources we have in this province, not to mention the growing number of students in our schools, we just should not be at the bottom in the country. Our kids deserve better. Alberta has experienced incredible population growth over the past few years, and this growth has put a serious strain on public infrastructure like our schools. But so far, this budget fails to address the growth in student population in communities large and small all across this province. There will only be new infrastructure spaces for our kids for about a third of the new students joining our classrooms each year. Now, the other place where Albertans need their government to be fully present is in the provision of health care to our loved ones. We need to get back to having a strong public health care system that is there for us and our loved ones when and where we need it. But in the midst of crisis after crisis, we see a budget where they aren't even planning to keep up to population and inflation. In addition, what little extra money they are spending is going to all the wrong places. For example, this budget finally revealed that the UCP wasted $90 million on a failed lab privatization scheme that would have been much better spent on the front lines in public health care. It shows that they spent $80 million on unsafe children's Tylenol that still sits on shelves unused while no other province will agree to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And now this budget shows at least $85 million will be spent on a chaotic reorganization of AHS that doesn't deliver for Albertans one single extra family doctor or nurse. And it shows that they wasted $69 million on a bunch of misleading news releases for the much-needed South Edmonton Hospital, one that they are now not going to build. So all of that adds up to well over $250 million on waste as a result of political decisions taken by this UCP. And all of this ideologically induced waste within our healthcare system came at a time when the system is operating over capacity and being held together literally by duct tape. And last year's budget, it does nothing to fix this chaos. So let's be clear. After breaking her affordability promises and driving up property taxes and a whole bunch of other taxes and fees, with health and education funding far below the rate of population and inflation growth, it is clear this budget doesn't set up Alberta for the sustainable and prosperous growth that everyone wants to see. And on that, I'd be happy to take any questions folks here might have.
We will now turn it over for questions. For those on Zoom, please use the raise hand function or *9. We'll have time for one question, one follow-up. We'll start with the room.
Susan Zielinski with the Red Deer Advocate. I was just wanting to get your opinion on the hospital funding for the Red Deer Hospital.
Well, thank you for that question. So we know how incredibly important moving moving the Red Deer Hospital project forward is to the people of this city. I'm told that most folks, coalition members, are cautiously optimistic about the amount of money that's been allocated in the budget this year. But I would say that there are two asterisks to that. First, will they actually spend it? Because as I just described, they spent $69 million in Edmonton only to cancel the project. Secondly, even as they go forward, what we hear from key stakeholders is that over the next 5 to 10 years, as this work is going on, there are tremendously important investment and collaborations that need to occur in the transition. And folks here are feeling very frustrated in that they've not been let in the room to plan for those collaborations and plan for those transitional investments that need to be made to maintain and grow capacity here while the project is underway. So we call on Adriana LaGrange to publicly invite in local stakeholders to be part not only of the planning conversation, but also the transition planning conversation to ensure that we get improved healthcare services in that hospital for the people of Central Alberta.
If services do improve during the construction, how confident would you be that there'd be staff to provide those services?
Well, our big concern here is that this budget does not allow for the growth of healthcare staff that we need to see. In fact, the number of healthcare staff that the budget projects they will hire over the course across Alberta, it's not Central Alberta specific, but nonetheless, the number of healthcare staff that they're projecting to hire over the term of the budget, over the next 3 years, sorry, not the budget, but over the UCP term, is about slightly more than 1/3 of what a simple population-based increase in staff would be. So based on, put another way, we expect Alberta to grow by a certain amount. In order to keep up with business as usual, we need a certain number of new staff to be hired. And the UCP is planning to hire about 1/3 of that number. And that would keep, and if they were to do the full amount as opposed to just 1/3, that would keep us at business as usual, which I think we all understand is crisis-inducing and not acceptable. So they are not putting the kind of money aside that they need to put aside to attract new healthcare workers to Alberta, to compete for new healthcare workers in Alberta relative to the rest of the world, and to train new healthcare workers here in Alberta.
Hi, Alessia from RD News Now. One of the things we hear about the budget is that it's focusing on fiscal sustainability, kind of saving for that rainy day given the economic times. What do you have to say about that claim made from the budget?
Well, I think it's a really sleight of hand, and I don't think that's what that they are actually doing. The claim was made that we were going to put money every year into the Heritage Trust Fund. Well, that's not what we're doing. The budget, we put last year's unexpected surplus into the Heritage Trust Fund. The budget going this year and going forward makes no allocation for money to go into the Heritage Trust Fund. So it's not what they say it is. It's just spin. But they're claiming that in order to distract from the fact that they are underfunding on other important fronts. So let us remember as well that debt can take a bunch of different forms. You can have debt on a ledger. You can also have infrastructure debt when you literally have kids in classrooms where the ceiling tiles are falling down and leaks are coming through. You should not be, like most Albertans know, if their roof is leaking in 3 rooms in the house, is that when you decide to put money into the bank and just let the leaking carry on? I would say Albertans deserve better management than that.
And as a follow-up, just with regards to your statements like that they're underfunding this, underfunding that, why would they want to do that if that is what they're doing?
Well, that's a really good question. So for instance, even on education, what we know about our public education is that not only are they underfunding it and not keeping up with population and inflation growth, they are disproportionately funding private schools. And so our public system is actually getting even less. And I would say that this is happening because the UCP, quite frankly, doesn't respect the value of a public education system and its role in ensuring equity and equality for all students, no matter where they come from and what circumstances their family are in. Public education is so important for building that kind of equal opportunity, but that's not something that is fundamental to UCP values. So instead, they're putting more money into private schools that where people have to pay tuition, and they're not ensuring the greatest accessibility in our public schools. The same thing goes for our public health care. As I outlined, not only are they not keeping up with inflation and population, they are continuously wasting money on ideological privatization schemes that don't work because that's what they believe in. And in the meantime, our public system struggles. And I would say that that goes against the values of Albertans. Albertans want good, strong public health care for them and their loved ones when they need it. And this UCP government is embarking on their 5th or 6th consecutive year of failing to meet those objectives.
We'll go to questions online. Again, it's the raise hand function or *9 by phone. We'll go to our first caller, Catherine. You should be able to speak.
The Alberta Today.
Hi.
A little bit later on, the province and federal government will be having an announcement on rural broadband, and I'm wondering, what do you think needs to happen in terms of internet connectivity? Why does it take so long? What do you want to see from that announcement?
Well, that's a really good, important point. You know, it's been, I believe now, 3 years since our party rolled out its Alberta's Future proposal to aggressively move forward in terms of providing broadband internet services to rural Alberta. Soon after we made that proposal, the UCP made a slightly less ambitious one, but still a reasonably ambitious one. In the last 3 years, they have underfunded it by about 70%. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that they promised to spend that they have not. So they are a solid 3 years behind schedule. It once again amounts to, wait for it, another broken promise by the UCP to rural Albertans.
Catherine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and I guess in your opening remarks, you talked about how people are facing this affordability crunch. They're paying more in property taxes, yet at the same time we're not spending enough on schools. So where would you like to see that funding come from?
Well, as you know, in the last election, as leader at the time, I proposed that we ask corporations to pay their fair share and that we increase the corporate tax level from the lowest in the country, where it is right now, to being the lowest in the country, where it would have been had we moved forward on it. And that's where you start to develop the fiscal capacity to address the important role the provincial government has with respect to a strong, robust public education system that invests in our economic future, and a strong, robust public healthcare system that keeps folks safe and healthy. Instead, what's happened is this government is actually becoming more dependent on renewable resource revenue, or sorry, not renewable, that's amusing, on non-renewable resource revenue. And then they're creating a different form of debt and deficit by way of shortchanging these important public services, which actually contribute not only to our well-being, but specifically to our economic growth.
Perfect. We'll do one more pass for questions, first in the room and online. Seeing none, that concludes today's press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.